Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are very happy to share with you different stories about love and betrayal from around the world. So let's begin our story journey today. Outside the Cedar Mountain Park office, tree shadows danced. Laurel stood by the window, phone pressed against her ear, deliberately lowering her voice. All her colleagues had already left the office. Only Laurel remained to organize today's audit files. Really? I can't believe he's planning to propose next month. She chuckled to her friend on the other end of the phone. Judging from the ring box I found in his bag, he's been planning it for a long time. Laughter erupted from the other end of the phone, with more female voices joining the conversation. Laurel pressed the speakerphone button and placed the phone on the desk. So what are you going to do? Macy's voice came through the phone. After he proposes, I'm going to dump him brutally. Laurel replied, her voice carrying a hint of cruel delight. I can't wait to see the expression on his always too serious face. Her friends immediately burst into laughter. Laurel was about to continue when she suddenly noticed a familiar figure flashing past the glass door of the office. It was Emmett. Her expression instantly froze as she quickly grabbed her phone and turned off the speakerphone. I'll call you back. She hurriedly hung up and rushed out of the office, but the corridor was already empty. Emmett drove his Ford pickup out of the National Park's administrative area. The car stereo played low country music, but he wasn't listening. In his mind echoed only Laurel's words. 3 years of feelings had become a complete joke on the day he had come to surprise Laurel. He calmly drove onto the highway, deciding to wait and see what would happen. 2 days later, the intercom in Emmett's apartment rang, the harsh buzzing breaking the morning quiet. Emmett, please open the door. Laurel's voice came through the intercom, mixed with sobs. I know you're home. I need to explain. Please give me a chance to explain. Emmett sat on the sofa, staring at the intercom, motionless. In his hands were several photographs, showing Laurel standing intimately with a man in front of a high-end hotel. The man wore an expensive suit with his hand resting on Laurel's waist, his posture familiar. Emmett, you can't do this to me. How long will I have to yell into the intercom before you'll respond? The whole building will hear me. Her voice became increasingly hysterical. Emmett pressed the intercom button and calmly said, You've already explained yourself quite clearly, Laurel. I won't see you again. All your things will be sent to your apartment door by a moving company. Goodbye forever. In the deep autumn of North America, the sound of saw teeth echoed through the spruce forest. Emmett skillfully operated a modified chainsaw, cutting down a diseased tree infested by pine beetles. As a forestry harvesting machine technician, he knew every machine intimately, especially excelling at chainsaw modification and maintenance. Hey man, how's this new batch of chainsaws performing? His colleague Floyd whistled as he approached. Torque's higher than expected, but the noise control is good. Emmett shut down the saw and removed his goggles. We can use them in the heavily infected area next week. I heard the Forest Service found another illegal logging area, just at the northwest border. Floyd lowered his voice. They say it's the furniture factory people, specifically targeting those protected ancient trees. Emmett nodded. This wasn't news. Since the beginning of 2023, spruce poaching cases in North America had exploded. The huge profits in the high-end timber market led many to take risks, especially those sustainable harvesting, labeled furniture manufacturers who secretly purchased large quantities of illegally harvested rare wood. Has anyone checked the new audit reports? Emmett asked, his thoughts inevitably drifting to Laurel. As a national park auditor, her job was precisely to assess forest health conditions and decide which areas could be legally harvested. Those auditors? Floyd scoffed. I met one the day before yesterday, quite a pretty woman, but she didn't even know the basics about trees. Emmett didn't respond. 3 years ago, that was how he had met Laurel. Back then, she had just been appointed as a national park auditor and came to the logging camp for a routine audit, her golden brown curls gleaming in the sunlight, professional and confident. They met during a heated discussion about pine beetle prevention and afterward quickly fell in love, developing into a stable long-term relationship. Back at his apartment that evening, Emmett opened his computer to check his emails. An email from an anonymous sender caught his attention, with the subject, Something You Should Know. The content was brief. Your girlfriend has betrayed you. Thursday night, Burlington Plaza Hotel. See for yourself. Emmett wanted to delete this obvious prank email, but his fingers stopped above the delete key. For the past 3 months, Laurel had indeed been acting strangely, frequent overtime, refusing to let him check her phone, decreased interest in intimate contact. Last week, she had even changed their mutually known phone password, setting a new one, with the excuse of company security policy requirements. Thursday night, Emmett parked his car and sat in a cafe across from the Burlington Plaza Hotel. At 8:15, a black Audi stopped in front of the hotel, and Laurel got out wearing a red dress he had never seen before. From the other side of the car emerged a tall man, well-dressed, about 40 years old. The man's hand rested naturally on Laurel's waist as they laughed and talked their way into the hotel. Emmett's heart sank. He took several photos, then left the cafe. On his way home, he played back a recording stored in his phone from the hotel. After discovering Laurel's abnormal behavior, out of instinct and caution developed over years of wilderness survival, he had placed a small recording device in her bag. This wasn't something he would normally do, but his instincts told him he needed to protect himself. In the recording, the conversation between Laurel and that man was clearly audible. "Vance, are you sure this won't cause any problems?" Laurel's voice sounded slightly nervous. "Don't worry, sweetheart," the man answered, his voice deep. "As long as you mark that area as a severe beetle infestation in your audit report, we can legally obtain the harvesting permit. This batch of spruce is worth quite a bit of money. But if we're discovered, we won't be. You're a professional. Who would question your report? Once this deal is completed, I promise to take you on a European vacation, just the two of us." "What about Emmett?" "Oh, that repairman?" The man chuckled. "Didn't you say he'll propose soon? After he proposes, you can dump him, and then we can be together openly." The recording continued, but Emmett had heard enough. The woman he once loved had not only deceived his feelings, but was also using her position to participate in illegal logging activities. The reason Laurel chose to betray him was obvious. Vance could give her luxury items, extravagant travel, and social status, things that he, as a forestry worker, could not provide. That night, Emmett began planning his action. He wouldn't let the traitors get away unscathed. Over the following week, Emmett behaved normally, even proactively inviting Laurel out for the weekend. He needed more information, especially about Vance. During one dinner, he cleverly guided the conversation. "How's work lately?" he asked casually. "Busy," Laurel replied, her eyes slightly evasive. "We've recently discovered a few new beetle-infested areas that need special attention." "Really? In which area? Perhaps our team can help with the clearing." "The northern border area." Laurel seemed to relax a bit. "By the way, I might need to travel for a few days next week to attend an industry conference." "Okay. Do you need me to take you to the airport?" "No need. There are colleagues going together. It's already arranged." After dinner, Emmett followed Laurel home. After confirming she had safely entered her apartment, he drove to her office. As equipment maintenance personnel, he had access to most national park facilities. At 2 a.m., with the parking lot empty, he skillfully used a spare key to enter the building. In Laurel's office, Emmett quickly reviewed her files. As he suspected, the forest health report for the northern border had been severely exaggerated, with the area actually affected by pine beetles only half of what was indicated in the report. Based on this report, the Forest Service had already approved large-scale harvesting operations in that area. What shocked Emmett even more was that he found complete communication records between Laurel and Vance. This man named Vance was the chief procurement officer at Claremont Furniture Factory, responsible for purchasing logs for high-end furniture manufacturing. Through Laurel's false reports, Vance could obtain rare spruce that shouldn't have been harvested, and the value of this timber on the market was enough to make them a fortune. Emmett also discovered a list of gifts Vance had given to Laurel: jewelry worth thousands of dollars, designer bags, and 2 tickets to Paris, with the departure date next week, which was Laurel's so-called industry conference. After collecting all the evidence, Emmett quietly left the office. Back home, he began devising a meticulous plan. Not only would he make these traitors face legal sanctions, but also have them taste the bitter fruit of betrayal. The next day, Emmett requested a week off from his company, citing the need to care for his sick mother. In reality, he went to an abandoned warehouse in the suburbs, which had previously been a temporary equipment room for their team. The warehouse stored various logging equipment, including several decommissioned chainsaws. For the next few days, Emmett hardly rested, investing himself completely in his project. He modified several chainsaws into remotely controlled devices, each part carefully calibrated to ensure they could automatically start under specific conditions. Wednesday night, Emmett followed Vance to Claremont Furniture Factory. Taking advantage of the darkness, he infiltrated the parking lot and found Vance's delivery truck. This truck was evidently used for transporting illegally harvested timber. Emmett pried open the container's lock and quickly installed his device. For modified chainsaws fixed at the four corners of the container, connected through a sophisticated remote control system. After completing the installation, Emmett left the scene without leaving any trace. Now, he only needed to wait for the right moment. Thursday morning, Emmett received a text from Laurel. "Want to have dinner together tonight? I have something important to tell you." This was the moment he had been waiting for. Laurel was preparing to break up with him. According to his plan, today was also the day Vance would go to the northern border to inspect the illegal timber. "Of course," Emmett replied. 7 p.m., Blue Lake Restaurant. "Perfect," Laurel answered. "See you then." At 6:45 p.m., Emmett arrived punctually at the Blue Lake Restaurant. He chose a window seat where he could see the parking lot. At 7:03, Laurel arrived, wearing a black dress, her makeup impeccable. "Sorry I'm late," she smiled, though she didn't kiss his cheek as usual. "Today was a bit busy." "No problem," Emmett responded. "You look beautiful." Dinner proceeded calmly but somewhat awkwardly. Laurel occasionally checked her phone, as if waiting for some message. Emmett maintained surface calm, but inwardly he was calculating the time. After dessert was served, Laurel put down her cutlery and took a deep breath. "Emmett, we need to talk." "I'm listening." Emmett looked into her eyes, his voice steady. "I've been thinking about our relationship lately." Laurel began her prepared script. "You're a good person, but I feel we might not be very compatible. Our life directions are different. I need more space." As Laurel was speaking, Emmett's phone vibrated once. It was the reminder he had set. Now, Vance should be at the northern border harvesting point inspecting that illegal timber, and his truck would be parked nearby. "I understand," Emmett said, his tone surprisingly calm. "Actually, I have something to tell you too." Laurel seemed somewhat surprised. She had probably expected more pleading and questioning. "Vance," Emmett continued, "the procurement officer from Claremont Furniture Factory, your lover, and also an illegal timber dealer." Laurel's face instantly turned pale. "What? What are you saying?" "No need to pretend, Laurel. I know everything. Your affair, your falsified forest health reports, and your plans to fly to Paris together next week. How could you possibly?" "What's important isn't how I know," Emmett interrupted her, "but that you betrayed me, betrayed your professional ethics, and even betrayed the forest you swore to protect." A flash of fear crossed Laurel's eyes, quickly turning to anger. "You followed me? You spied on me." "I merely confirmed my suspicions," Emmett answered. "And right now, Vance should be experiencing some unexpected situations." At that moment, Emmett's phone rang. He picked up the phone, pressed answer, and simultaneously placed the phone on the table on speakerphone. "Who is this?" A terrified male voice came from the other end. "Who's controlling these damn machines? They've gone crazy." The background was filled with the harsh sound of saws and impacts. "Vance." Laurel recognized the voice, her face growing even paler. "Listen, whoever you are, stop. I'll pay you," Vance screamed, his voice revealing pure terror. "Where did these saws come from?" "They're moving by themselves." After another round of metal impacts and with breaking sounds, there was a scream. The call suddenly ended. "What have you done?" Laurel asked tremblingly, her voice almost a whisper. Emmett calmly replied, "I'm just letting the traitors get their deserved punishment. Don't worry, the saws won't harm him too much. Just enough to make him remember today." That night, the news reported a bizarre accident in the northern forest area. A man had been trapped by automatically activated logging equipment, and his limbs had been cut with precise mortise and tenon structures, a type of woodworking joint typically used in high-end furniture making. That same night, the National Park Administration received an anonymous package containing evidence of Laurel's falsified audit reports, as well as her communication records with Vance. 3 days later, Laurel was suspended pending investigation, while Vance was arrested for illegal logging and commercial fraud. Though his limbs were not in life-threatening danger, he would need long-term rehabilitation treatment, and his professional career was completely ruined. Emmett was packing his luggage in his apartment, preparing to move to another city and start anew. The doorbell rang. It was Laurel, her eyes swollen, obviously having cried. "Please, Emmett," she begged. "I know I made a mistake, but I truly love you. Money and vanity blinded me. Please give me a chance to make amends." Emmett looked at the woman he once deeply loved, without a trace of emotion in his eyes. "Some betrayals cannot be remedied, Laurel. You not only betrayed our feelings, but also your professional ethics and your own conscience. Goodbye." He closed the door, shutting out Laurel's cries. The sound of betrayal was like the echo of saw teeth cutting wood. Once started, it cannot be stopped until everything is completely destroyed. On a winter morning, sunlight pierced through the clouds, spilling onto the snow-covered forest. Emmett stood at the edge of his new work area, breathing in the fresh air. He had moved to northern Wisconsin 3 months ago, and here the forests were more pristine and serene than where he had worked before. "Hey, mechanical genius," his new colleague Russell approached, handing him a cup of hot coffee. "I heard headquarters is very satisfied with your improved safety locking system." Emmett took the coffee with a slight smile, just made some small adjustments to allow the equipment to automatically lock when no one is operating it. Safety first. Since designing that special device, Emmett's technical talent had gained more recognition. He applied the remote control and safety locking technology he had learned from that experience to regular forestry equipment, creating a system to prevent equipment theft or misuse. Now, this system was being promoted within the Forest Bureau, known as the Guardian Program. By the way, Russell sipped his coffee. "Did you hear? That female auditor who falsified audit reports last year has been sentenced, though only to 2 years, but her career is finished." Emmett nodded expressionlessly. For 3 months, he had tried to put Laurel's betrayal behind him, focusing on his new life. But on some nights, when he was alone, those memories would still resurface. "And that furniture factory procurement officer," Russell continued. "I heard he can now only walk with prosthetics, and he owes a fortune in medical fees." "Karma," Emmett briefly replied. During lunch, Emmett sat alone in a corner of the camp cafeteria, browsing news on his phone. A local news item caught his attention. Former National Park auditor opens forest protection NGO after prison release. The article mentioned that Laurel, after serving a brief sentence, was now dedicated to protecting forest resources and exposing illegal logging activities. In the photo, Laurel looked much thinner, but her gaze was more determined. The article quoted her words, "I was once part of the problem. Now I want to be part of the solution. My mistakes have taught me the consequences of actions." Emmett closed the news page. He didn't care how Laurel rebuilt her life, nor did he plan to forgive her betrayal. For him, that relationship had ended completely, like a felled tree that would never grow again. That afternoon, a sudden snowstorm forced all outdoor operations to pause. Workers gathered in the camp's main building, while Emmett chose to go to the equipment room to check the machinery. In this silence, he could focus more on his work, undisturbed by past memories. As he was adjusting the balance system of a new chainsaw, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Emmett speaking," he answered briefly. "Emmett," a familiar female voice came through. "It's me, Laurel." Emmett's hand paused for a second, then continued working. "I have nothing to say to you." "I know." Laurel's voice sounded unusually calm. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm about to head to a virgin forest in Montana to investigate a large-scale illegal logging case. According to my information, it's Vance's former partners who are operating it. What does that have to do with me?" "It could be dangerous," Laurel continued, "but I must do this. This is my way of making amends. I don't seek your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what's truly important." There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then she softly said, "Take care, Emmett." After the call ended, Emmett stood there, his thoughts jumbled. He didn't care about Laurel's redemption journey, but as someone who still had a conscience, he couldn't ignore potential danger. That night, Emmett contacted several friends in Montana, asking them to keep an eye on the progress of that illegal logging case investigation. This wasn't for Laurel, he told himself, but for the protection of the forest. A week later, Emmett received a package containing a set of professional chainsaw safety devices and a letter. The letter was from Laurel, and the content was simple and straightforward. Emmett, these are the latest safety devices I found at a professional equipment company and thought you might be interested. I have officially recommended your safety locking system to the Forest Service, and they are very interested. Not expecting a response, just a small compensation. Laurel. Emmett examined these safety devices. They were indeed the most advanced on the market. He put the package and letter aside and continued his work. However, that night he had a dream. He saw himself standing in a devastated forest, with marks of betrayal engraved on each stump around him. 2 months later, spring arrived. The forest began to awaken, new life emerging from beneath the melting snow. Emmett was assigned to a new project, tasked with testing a batch of new environmentally friendly logging equipment. This work was full of challenges, just what he needed. One morning, Russell rushed into the equipment room with a newspaper. Have you seen the news? That Laurel has been kidnapped. During her investigation in Montana, Emmett quickly grabbed the newspaper. The front page reported on Laurel's disappearance while investigating a large-scale illegal logging case. According to witnesses, she had been forcibly taken away by a group of armed men and remained missing. Police suspected this was related to the timber smuggling group she was investigating. You know her, right? Russell asked. Your reaction was strange when I mentioned her before. I used to know her, Emmett briefly replied, putting down the newspaper and continuing his work. But his mind was no longer on the equipment. After work, Emmett sat alone in his apartment, staring at the news on TV. The screen showed the last place Laurel had been seen, a virgin forest that had been heavily logged. A reporter was interviewing the local sheriff. We have reason to believe that Ms. Lawrence had key evidence about this smuggling group, which made her a target. Emmett turned off the TV and walked to the window. He had no obligation to care about Laurel's safety. She had betrayed him, betrayed his trust. But another voice echoed in his mind. Regardless of what mistakes Laurel had made, she was now trying to do the right thing, and this might cost her her life. After a night of consideration, Emmett made his decision. The next morning, he requested a week off and then drove toward Montana. This was absolutely not for Laurel. He was certain of that. He firmly refused to let his compassion soften his attitude toward betrayal. This was purely to prevent more environmental crimes, for justice. Traversing the pristine forest of Lindong took Emmett a full 2 days. According to information from his forestry friends, Laurel's last investigation point was at a logging camp deep in the mountains. This camp outwardly appeared to be a legal logging company, but was actually the forward base of the smuggling group. At dusk on the 3rd day, Emmett reached the target area. The distant camp was brightly lit, and even in the twilight, he could make out the silhouettes of large logging equipment. Emmett put on infrared night vision goggles and carefully approached the edge of the camp. Through the goggles, he observed armed guards patrolling the camp, clearly exceeding the security level of a normal logging camp. In a somewhat remote cabin, he noticed some movement, a figure being dragged inside, with a form that looked like Laurel. Emmett's heart raced, but he remained calm. Rushing in to rescue someone would be foolish. He needed a plan. Back at the car, he opened the trunk and took out a specially crafted toolbox. Inside was his latest improved remote control device, more precise and controllable than the version he had used on Vance. Over the next few hours, Emmett infiltrated the camp perimeter and installed his device on several main logging machines. These machines, once modified, could perform specific actions under his control. At 2 a.m., when most people were resting, Emmett initiated his plan. First phase, cut the camp's power. A controlled excavator accidentally crashed into the generator set, plunging the entire camp into darkness. Taking advantage of the chaos, Emmett activated the second phase, noise interference. Several chainsaws started simultaneously, producing an ear-splitting sound that drew the guards to investigate. Under this perfect cover, Emmett infiltrated the cabin where Laurel was being held. The 2 guards at the door had already left to deal with the emergency. After opening the door lock with a master key, he saw Laurel. She was tied to a chair, with bruises on her face, but still conscious. Emmett, she looked at him in disbelief. What are you doing here? We'll talk later. Emmett quickly untied her ropes. We must leave. At that moment, a tall figure appeared in the doorway. It was Mark, Vance's former partner, now the smuggling group's leader. He held a gun in his hand. What a touching reunion, Mark sneered. Looks like our little auditor has a rescuer. Emmett stood calmly, his hands slightly raised. You don't want to do this, Mark. Oh, why not? Mark pointed his gun at Emmett's chest. Do you know what Lawrence discovered? Our entire transportation network, every route from North America to Asia. This is worth millions. Now both of you must disappear. Are you sure? Emmett asked, his voice surprisingly calm. Look at your right hand. Mark instinctively looked down, and in that instant, Emmett pressed the remote control in his pocket. A giant logging machine in the center of the camp suddenly started, producing a thunderous roar that attracted everyone's attention, including Mark's. Seizing this opportunity, Emmett quickly acted, a precise strike sending Mark's gun flying. Laurel, though injured, also fought back, grabbing a nearby wooden board and striking Mark's knee hard. After Mark fell, Emmett tied him up, then he and Laurel quickly evacuated. They had just reached the edge of the camp when Mark's men discovered the anomaly and began pursuit. My car is 2 kilometers west. Emmett pointed toward the forest. Can you run? Laurel nodded. Though her steps were unsteady, her gaze was determined. I can. I owe you this. They ran through the forest, the shouts of the pursuers gradually fading. When they reached Emmett's car, Laurel was exhausted. Emmett helped her fasten her seatbelt, then started the car. Thank you, Laurel said softly, though I know you didn't come for me. Emmett didn't respond, focusing on driving. He had indeed not come for Laurel, but for his own conscience. Regardless of what had happened in the past, he couldn't let someone die for doing the right thing. Upon reaching the nearest town, Emmett contacted the local police. Under their protection, Laurel handed over all the evidence she had collected, detailed transportation records, coordinates of illegal logging points, and the organizational structure of the smuggling group. This information was enough to destroy the entire smuggling network. I should go, Emmett told Laurel after the police completed their records. You'll be safe. Wait, Laurel called out to him. At least let me say thank you. Not just for today, but for making me understand the consequences of actions. Emmett looked at her expressionlessly. Her once beautiful features now bore scars, but he felt not a hint of pity or wavering. His attitude toward betrayal remained consistent, unforgivable. I don't expect your forgiveness, Laurel continued. I just want you to know that I regret my choices, and every day I try to make amends. Not for redemption, but because it's the right thing. It's the right thing. That doesn't matter, Laurel, Emmett coldly responded, his gaze hard as stone. Whatever you do, some things can never be remedied. Good luck, but between us, it's forever over. He turned and left without the slightest hesitation, without looking back. The wounds of betrayal will never heal, and some boundaries, once crossed, can never return to the starting point. 3 months later, Emmett returned to his post in Wisconsin. The media reported on the dismantling of that smuggling group, and Laurel received some public recognition, but that meant nothing to Emmett. His participation in the rescue wasn't for her, but for his own sense of conscience and justice. On a quiet Saturday morning, as Emmett was organizing his belongings in his apartment, he found a small package, the postmark showing it was from Montana. He looked at the sender, Laurel Lawrence, and without hesitation threw the entire package into the trash. Let the past stay in the past. He needed no reminders or contacts. Emmett stood by the window, looking out at the forest. New saplings grew beside old stumps, but felled trees would never be reborn. Similarly, betrayed trust can never be restored. He had accepted this reality. No forgiveness, no forgetting, only the determination to move forward. In the distant Montana, Laurel stood at the edge of a forest replanted after illegal logging. Her public image had somewhat improved after exposing the smuggling gang, but the emptiness and regret in her heart never diminished. She understood that some mistakes are too severe, and no matter how much compensation she offers, she will never gain forgiveness. This wasn't redemption, but the lifelong price she must pay. And Vance, that once confident furniture factory procurement officer, now could only walk with prosthetics and relied on painkillers to get through his days. His company went bankrupt, his reputation was in tatters, and the luxurious life he once craved became an unreachable memory. His suffering wasn't redemption, but the punishment he deserved. The price of betrayal, like the cut of a saw into wood, can never be erased. This is a story about choices and consequences, a warning without redemption. If this story has resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating content. We look forward to seeing you in our next story.